Before we dive in, I've got a quick question for you. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. It's always wild seeing how far these stories travel. Now, imagine this. Trevor Philips suddenly steps into the Red Dead Redemption 2 universe. What happens next? Let's find out. The moment Trevor lands, the air feels different. Gone are the distant hums of traffic and neon glow of Blaine County nights. Instead, he's hit with the raw scent of dust, leather, and gunpowder. The horizon stretches endlessly, golden under the sun, dotted with small wooden towns, rickety windmills, and wandering cattle. He blinks, scanning the landscape with that familiar manic glint in his eyes, and for a brief second he seems almost impressed. But that's quickly replaced by confusion. His hand instinctively reaches for the dashboard, or the ignition of a car that isn't there, his mind already cursing the backwardness of the world he's fallen into. A horse grazes nearby, indifferent to his frantic gesturing, and Trevor, never one for subtlety, mutters something about this ridiculous two-legged horseless bullshit, earning a wary glance from a passing farmer. Trevor's first steps into this universe are chaotic. He grabs a stray stick, imagining it's a gun, swinging wildly at the air, before realizing the local firearms require a bit more finesse. His usual unpredictability collides immediately with the Old West's slower pace. No cars to speed off in, no remote detonations to cause havoc from a distance. Just him, his fists, and the crude revolvers of the era. And yet, this restriction doesn't calm him. It excites him. It's a playground built for an outlaw who thrives on mayhem. And Trevor wastes no time exploring its boundaries. A tumbleweed rolls past, and he kicks it like a soccer ball, shouting at it like it's an enemy combatant, earning the first curious looks from townsfolk who have long since learned to ignore the stranger in the dust. As he wanders into the nearest settlement, Valentine with its saloon doors swinging in the wind, the locals' reaction is immediate. Merchants freeze mid-sweep, children clutch their mothers, and the bartender eyes him like a cornered rattlesnake. Trevor, unfazed, leans against the bar, squinting at bottles of whiskey he's never seen, muttering about the primitive inventory system before grabbing a glass and tossing it back in one gulp, shattering it against the wall. Chaos erupts instantly. Chairs topple, a poker game ends in screams, and a hat flies across the room like a projectile. The entire scene is a perfect snapshot of Trevor in any world. Unpredictable, violent, and somehow magnetic. Outside, the first test comes in the form of a horse. Trevor's eyes narrow as he sizes it up, his modern mind struggling with the ancient reality of horseback travel. "All right, you overgrown lawnmower, let's see what you got," he mutters, swinging onto the saddle like he's straddling a motorbike. The horse bucks violently, throwing Trevor across the dirt street, where he lands face first in a pile of manure, groaning but already laughing. Passers-by, half amused, half horrified, step back. This is not your ordinary cowboy. Trevor gets up, brushes himself off, and hops on again, this time somehow mastering the animal with a manic grin, galloping through the town as if he owns it. Windows rattle, dogs bark, and lawmen scramble. In Trevor's eyes, this is pure freedom. The thrill of uncontained chaos unleashed in a world that moves far too slowly to contain him. But it's not all fun and games. Trevor quickly realizes that the Red Dead Redemption world has its own rules, deadly rules. A misfired pistol in Valentine draws the attention of the local sheriff, whose patience is notoriously short. The confrontation is tense, a high-stakes game of nerves and aggression. Trevor's instinct is to escalate. He waves his arms, yells at the lawman about obsolete firearms and corrupted authority, and attempts a theatrical dive behind a wagon. The sheriff, unmoved by the theatrics, draws a shot, and Trevor, ever reactive, retaliates in kind, triggering a wild chase through the dirt streets, leaving terrified citizens ducking for cover. Horses gallop into fences, barrels explode from Trevor's improvised chaos, and the sound of gunfire and yelling fills the town square. Even in these first chaotic hours, it becomes clear that Trevor is not merely surviving in this world. He's reshaping it. The gentle rhythm of frontier life, the slow, measured tension that governs Arthur Morgan's world, is now punctuated by Trevor's erratic energy. Every door kicked, every horse startled, every citizen terrified marks a new rule. Trevor doesn't conform. He adapts, but only to exploit, to push boundaries, to force the world around him to bend to his own brand of disorder. The townsfolk may not understand him, the law may attempt to control him, but Trevor thrives in the liminal space between fear and awe. The first day of his adventure ends not with peace or compromise, but with a town in disarray, and Trevor perched atop a haystack, cackling at the sheer beauty of the chaos he's unleashed. By the time the sun dips behind the distant hills, Trevor has begun to learn that the Old West has a rhythm of its own, one that punishes recklessness but rewards audacity. He wanders past the outskirts of Valentine, kicking up dust and gawking at the wide-open plains, muttering about the lack of paved roads and prehistoric infrastructure. But even as he complains, there's a thrill in the vastness, the kind of freedom a city could never offer. The plains stretch endlessly, and for Trevor, who's never known restraint, every tree, every rock, every stray animal is a potential instrument of chaos. He spots a herd of cattle, and in a moment of manic inspiration decides they must experience adrenaline. Horses whinny in panic as Trevor shouts and waves his arms, the herd scattering across the plains like living fireworks, leaving behind a trail of dust, startled farmers, and wide-eyed children. The first night in this strange new world brings a different set of challenges. Trevor is not accustomed to sleeping under the stars without the comfort of air conditioning, a locked door, or even a bed that doesn't smell faintly of mildew. He finds a clearing near a creek, sets up a makeshift campfire, and begins talking aloud to himself, as he always does, recounting his disbelief at being teleported to some cowboy hellscape. The night sounds are alien, coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bark of a stray dog. And then there's the wildlife. A raccoon skitters close to investigate, only to be flung into the air by Trevor's overreaction, prompting a mix of horror and laughter. The wilderness of Red Dead is alive, reactive, and entirely unprepared for a man like Trevor. The following day, Trevor's exploration takes him deeper into the frontier, and with every step, the contrast between his chaotic energy and the methodical, honor-bound nature of this world becomes more pronounced. He attempts to rob a general store as he would back home, but instead of cash registers, he's met with drawers full of coins and ledgers. Confused, he throws the coins into the air like confetti, scattering papers and creating pandemonium. The storekeeper, a grizzled man who has seen his share of trouble, watches in silent disbelief as Trevor proceeds to use a broomstick as a weapon, knocking down barrels, sending goods flying, and yelling at an empty corner about corporate conspiracies in 1899. By now, the sheriff is in pursuit again, and Trevor's attempt at escape turns into a multi-block chase, leaping over fences, sliding under wagons, and narrowly avoiding a runaway stagecoach, all while hollering at the lawmen to bring your best. In this whirlwind of violence and absurdity, Trevor also encounters his first taste of the human dynamics that define RDR2. Townsfolk react differently. Some flee, some freeze, and a rare few are audacious enough to attempt confrontation. A pair of cowboys in a saloon challenges him to a fistfight, thinking his odd behavior is some kind of show. Trevor, delighted, accepts immediately, turning what should have been a brief scuffle into an epic, almost slapstick battle, furniture splintering, glasses smashing, and a chandelier swaying dangerously overhead. By the end, both cowboys are nursing bruises, the saloon is nearly in ruins, and Trevor is laughing hysterically, already scanning for the next spectacle. But even in the midst of chaos, Trevor begins to sense patterns in this world. A kind of primitive logic. Horses respond to loud noises. Townsfolk have routines. Lawmen can be outsmarted if handled carefully. And the wilderness itself can be weaponized. He starts experimenting, luring animals into traps, creating distractions with firecrackers he fashions from stray gunpowder, and using natural cover to ambush anyone foolish enough to confront him. Each success reinforces his sense of dominance. Each failure fuels his manic determination. The frontier, so vast and untamed, is both playground and battlefield, and Trevor is a storm passing through it, leaving permanent ripples of fear, awe, and disbelief. As the sun climbs the next day, Trevor's antics attract the first rumors in nearby towns. Stories of a madman from another world riding recklessly, setting fires, and speaking nonsense about distant lands where cars and phones exist. It's only a matter of time before his path collides with something, or someone, that could either harness his chaos or be utterly destroyed by it. And Trevor, of course, is blissfully unaware of the limits of his new playground. He's not planning to adapt quietly. He's here to dominate, disrupt, and turn the Red Dead universe upside down, one explosive, unpredictable step at a time. By now, it's clear that Trevor's arrival isn't just a collision of worlds. It's a rewriting of the rules. The frontier, for all its rugged beauty and disciplined outlaws, has never faced someone who doesn't play by any rules at all. And as night falls once more, with the distant howl of wolves echoing across the plains, Trevor sits atop a ridge, looking out over the valley, a manic grin on his face, whispering to no one in particular, "Now this is my kind of town." The chaos Trevor leaves behind in Valentine spreads like wildfire. By the morning, rumors have grown taller than the mountains. Tales of a strange man who rides like the wind, yells at the sky, and fights with a ferocity no local outlaw has ever seen. But the frontier isn't empty, and out here, Trevor's antics cannot go unnoticed for long. As he rides along a dusty trail, still cackling about last night's saloon fiasco, he notices tracks. A horse, larger than most, and a group of riders approaching fast. At first, Trevor is indifferent. Anyone could be a local gang, another lawman, or a farmer angry that their cow got trampled. But the way these riders move, coordinated and silent, immediately sparks something in him. He narrows his eyes. These are no ordinary townsfolk. These are professional outlaws. And instinctively, Trevor knows. Either he joins them, or they become part of his playground. The riders pull into view, and Trevor's first true encounter with the Linde gang begins. Dutch stands at the front, charismatic and deliberate, while Arthur Morgan, ever cautious, assesses the stranger with the sharpness of a man who has survived 1,000 threats. Trevor's grin widens instantly. Here are men who understand chaos, at least in theory. He waves energetically, shouting over the wind, "Hey! You guys running a circus too, or is it just me?" Dutch tilts his head, amused but wary, while Arthur's eyes narrow. Trevor, oblivious to the subtle cues of the Old West, misreads their silence as invitation. He spurs his horse forward, executing an exaggerated slide to a stop directly in front of the gang, dirt spraying in every direction. What follows is a collision of worlds. Dutch, ever the philosopher, begins one of his long-winded speeches about loyalty, freedom, and the shifting nature of morality. Trevor listens for a few seconds, then interrupts with a booming laugh and a story about crazy stuff that happens in the future, gestures wildly, and mimics gunfights that involve vehicles exploding. Micah, standing to the side, sneers, recognizing in Trevor a kindred spirit, but also a threat. Someone who could rival his own chaotic tendencies. Arthur, patient as ever, says nothing at first, just watches, trying to predict how this unpredictable man might tip the delicate balance of their world. Trevor wastes no time putting his brand of energy into action. He volunteers for a nearby heist. Without understanding the full plan, the gang's careful strategy, or even the consequences of blowing a safe with dynamite in a tight frontier town, he straps explosives in ways that would terrify even Dutch, who normally encourages boldness but prefers control. Arthur sighs, muttering to himself, "God help us." But there's a flicker of recognition. Trevor is dangerous, yes, but in a way that could be useful. The first test comes immediately, a train robbery. Trevor leaps onto the engine, yelling at the conductor as if he were some futuristic vehicle operator, smashing levers and trying to override the ancient machine. The gang scrambles to adjust, Micah cackling with rivalry, Arthur muttering strategic commands, and Dutch, surprisingly, grinning at the audacity. The result is chaos, yet somehow, amidst the explosions, gunfire, and screams, the heist succeeds. Not gracefully, but effectively. Trevor's unpredictability has turned their careful plan into a spectacle of destructive genius. But Trevor isn't just shaking up the gang's operations. He's changing the rules of interaction in this world. Wild animals now flee at his approach. Townsfolk scatter in unprecedented fear, and lawmen, accustomed to measured threats, are overwhelmed by his manic energy. He experiments constantly, setting traps, creating distractions, and using environmental hazards in ways that Arthur or Dutch would never consider. He laughs as coyotes scatter in panic, as barrels roll down hills toward unsuspecting opponents, and as towns are turned into a theater of chaos where he is both actor and director. Even Arthur, cautious and principled, finds himself reluctantly impressed. There's a method to the madness, he realizes, even if the method involves terrifying entire towns just for fun. Trevor's immersion into the frontier doesn't stop with crime. He begins testing the boundaries of survival in the wilderness, trying to train wild animals, building makeshift contraptions from logs and ropes, and shouting at the sky about the injustice of prehistoric gravity. A bear wanders too close, and Trevor, thinking it's a minor inconvenience, waves it off like an irritated pedestrian, only to scramble up a tree when it growls. In these moments, Trevor's personality shines in contrast to the stoic, methodical world of the Old West. Where Arthur relies on skill and patience, Trevor relies on audacity, improvisation, and sheer nerve. Every step he takes leaves an imprint: overturned carts, scorched earth, broken fences, and a growing legend whispered among townsfolk. The man who came from nowhere and whose madness cannot be tamed. By the end of this stretch, Trevor has established himself as a force unlike anything the frontier has seen. His presence has disrupted towns, gangs, and wildlife alike, and his first encounters with the Linde gang hint at both alliance and tension. Dutch sees potential, Micah sees rivalry, Arthur sees a threat he can't quite measure, and Trevor sees opportunity. A new playground, a new chaos to master, and a new world to bend to his will. He doesn't yet understand the moral codes, the consequences, or the fragile balance of this era. But he doesn't care. Chaos, after all, is timeless. As the day wanes, Trevor finds himself standing on a ridge overlooking a valley dotted with farms, saloons, and the faint flicker of campfires. The sun casts long shadows, painting the land in golds and ambers, and for a moment the manic energy inside him stills, only slightly, as he takes in the sheer scale of this frontier. It's vast, it's lawless, and it's perfectly suited for someone like him. But he's not content to simply watch. Trevor thrives on interaction, on provocation, on leaving his mark. He slides down the ridge, kicking up dirt and rocks, and starts testing the limits of this new environment. A nearby fence becomes a makeshift obstacle course. He vaults over it like it's a parkour challenge, shouting at startled horses to pick up the pace, you prehistoric junk. Each leap, each stunt, each collision with reality is a statement. Trevor Philips has arrived. and he is here to bend this world to his will. Soon enough, the consequences of his actions begin to ripple. A herd of cattle he startled earlier crashes through a nearby farm, scattering chickens, trampling crops, and sending a farmer into a frantic chase. Trevor laughs uncontrollably from atop a hill, clapping his hands in delight, completely oblivious to the chaos he's leaving in his wake. The local law, initially baffled by the magnitude of his energy, now mobilizes in full force. Deputies and marshals converge on Valentine, tracking the trail of destruction with mounting frustration. But Trevor is always one step ahead. A man in motion, improvising constantly, using the environment to his advantage. He swings from ropes dangling from tree branches, rolls behind hay bales, and even uses the wind to his benefit, hurling rocks and bottles with deadly accuracy. Then comes the first serious test, a confrontation with a group of rival outlaws who mistake Trevor for an easy target. The encounter is cinematic chaos. Trevor, unrestrained and unpredictable, fights with a combination of brute strength, wild improvisation, and a strange genius that no ordinary outlaw could anticipate. A barrel rolls, a horse bucks, and Trevor swings from a low-hanging tree limb to land in the middle of the fight, taking out two men with precise, if unorthodox, strikes. By the end of it, the rival gang is scattered, nursing wounds and confusion, and Trevor, bloodied but laughing, wipes his hands and shouts, "Who's next?" This is not just survival, it's spectacle, a performance that marks him as something more than just an outsider, a force of nature that the frontier has never seen. Word spreads quickly through the towns. Barkeepers whisper about the madman from nowhere. Ranchers shake their heads, and travelers tell tales of a man who rides like the wind, talks nonsense, and fights like a whirlwind of destruction. Even within the Linde gang, the legend of Trevor begins to grow. Dutch, always a seeker of bold ideas, is intrigued by the potential of someone who throws caution to the wind in ways he could only dream of. Micah, ever jealous and eager to dominate chaos himself, watches Trevor with a mixture of fascination and envy. Arthur, steady and calculating, senses the dangerous edge Trevor brings, an edge that could either save or doom him. The dynamics are shifting. Trevor's arrival is not a simple meeting of worlds. It's a collision that will have lasting repercussions. The night brings reflection of a sort, though for Trevor, it's always a manic, excitable reflection. Around a small fire near a creek, he tosses stones into the water, muttering half-coherent plans about blowing up trains, robbing banks, and teaching these cowboys how to party. The wilderness is alive around him. Wolves howl, owls call, and the wind rustles through the trees, as if nature itself is acknowledging this new, unpredictable presence. Yet even in this environment, Trevor begins to adapt in his own twisted way. He experiments with trapping game, testing local weapons, and thinking through the unique logic of frontier combat. Every failure fuels his manic energy. Every success emboldens him further. In this strange world without modern conveniences, Trevor thrives not by fitting in, but by amplifying chaos. And the Red Dead universe is only beginning to understand the storm that has arrived. By the end of the first full cycle of Sun and Moon, the picture is clear. Trevor Philips is no mere visitor. He is a disruptor, a catalyst, a wild card whose presence forces everyone. Lawmen, townsfolk, rival outlaws, and even the Linde gang to reconsider the rules they thought governed this land. His arrival has been explosive, unpredictable, and utterly transformative. Where the frontier once relied on caution, patience, and honor, it now faces an agent of pure, unrelenting chaos. And Trevor? Trevor sits atop a hill, silhouetted against the twilight, horse snorting beneath him, a cigar clenched between his teeth, eyes gleaming with manic satisfaction. This place, he mutters to no one in particular, was made for me. With that, the stage is set. Trevor has arrived. The frontier has been challenged, and the collision between a modern outlaw and the Old West has begun in earnest. The chaos has been unleashed, the dynamics have shifted, and there's no turning back. The Red Dead Redemption 2 universe will never be the same again. Trevor Philips has already left his mark on the Red Dead frontier, and now the real test begins. The Linde gang, masters of the Old West delicate balance between lawlessness and honor, have had their first extended encounter with him, and the results are complicated. Dutch, ever the visionary, sees in Trevor a raw, untamed energy that could be harnessed for spectacular results, but the same energy is dangerously volatile, unbound by codes or caution. Arthur Morgan, who has spent years navigating the fine line between survival and morality, senses the threat immediately. Trevor does not respect boundaries, he does not negotiate, he does not hesitate, and for a man like Arthur, this is both exhilarating and terrifying. Micah Bell, predictably, sees only opportunity and rivalry, recognizing in Trevor someone who could either eclipse him or become an ally in destruction. The first moments of interaction between these worlds set the stage for a collision that will redefine the limits of chaos in the Linde universe. Trevor approaches Dutch with his usual manic enthusiasm, gesturing wildly and talking a mile a minute about explosives, modern weaponry, and strategies from a world Arthur can barely comprehend. Dutch listens politely at first, nodding along, his mind working overtime to extract value from this unpredictable human tornado. He talks about loyalty, about the freedom of the open plains, and the importance of planning, all while Trevor interrupts, demonstrating more efficient ways to approach robbery and confrontation, occasionally throwing in wild hand gestures that leave the gang both impressed and horrified. The tension is immediate and electric. Trevor does not understand the subtlety of Dutch's philosophy, nor does he respect it, and yet his suggestions often yield results that are both brilliant and catastrophic. Arthur, watching silently from the side, knows that any alliance with Trevor comes at a price that could be measured in property, in lives, or in the fragile cohesion of the gang itself. Micah Bell is not patient. He steps forward, his face twisted in a mixture of anger and envy, testing Trevor immediately. He challenges Trevor on a minor robbery plan, suggesting that the stranger's methods are reckless and unworthy of a man in the gang. Trevor laughs, the sound high-pitched and manic, and immediately accepts the challenge, turning it into a spectacle. He begins improvising with the environment, using rocks, bottles, and the natural landscape in ways that defy logic and strategy, yet somehow work. The two men circle each other, testing dominance, the gang watching in tense fascination. Dutch smiles, perhaps more at the energy than the conflict itself. Arthur tenses, preparing for the worst, and the rest of the gang shifts nervously, knowing that these first clashes are not mere tests. They are indicators of the chaos to come. Trevor thrives in this environment, feeding off the tension, pushing the boundaries of control and planning, and leaving no one in doubt that he is a force unto himself. Despite the friction, there are moments of synergy, brief glimpses where Trevor's chaotic genius aligns with the gang's calculated approach. A stagecoach heist, for instance, unfolds in a combination of traditional skill and modern improvisation. Trevor sets up distractions, hurls objects with uncanny precision, and engages enemies in a way that complements Arthur's steady, strategic movements. The result is a successful robbery that's both thrilling and terrifying, leaving everyone involved exhilarated and exhausted. Dutch, fascinated, begins to consider how much of Trevor's unpredictability could be integrated into their operations, while Arthur quietly analyzes the risks, calculating whether the benefit of the chaos outweighs the inevitable fallout. Micah, predictably, seethes at the attention Trevor receives, already plotting how to assert his own dominance in this new dynamic. Trevor's influence extends beyond the mechanics of robbery and survival. He begins to challenge the gang's very philosophy. Dutch speaks of honor and loyalty, of careful planning and the delicate balance between freedom and consequence. Trevor scoffs at these notions, often verbally sparring with Dutch in loud, manic bursts, gesturing at the plains and the towns as if the very landscape itself validates his worldview. He is not concerned with morality or codes. His only guiding principle is the amplification of chaos. Arthur finds himself in a strange position. He recognizes Trevor's effectiveness, admires the raw audacity, but is acutely aware that such power without discipline can destroy everything the gang has built. The tension between the old world rules of the frontier and the anarchic unpredictability of Trevor Philips sets the tone for a series of confrontations that are as psychological as they are physical, each encounter revealing just how incompatible, yet strangely complementary, these worlds can be. As the sun climbs and shadows shift across the valley, the gang begins to adapt to Trevor's presence, just as he adapts to theirs. He experiments with their horses, their weapons, their plans, injecting chaos at every opportunity while secretly observing the methods of survival and loyalty that have kept the Linde gang alive in a world that rewards caution as much as courage. Dutch encourages, Arthur restrains, Micah challenges, and Trevor simply laughs, thriving in the dynamic interplay of control and anarchy. In these moments, it becomes clear that the true clash is not just about robbery, survival, or strategy. It is about ideology. Trevor represents an unstoppable, unbound approach to life, a philosophy of pure action and reaction, while the gang embodies structure, loyalty, and calculated risk. The tension between these ideals is immediate, palpable, and destined to shape every action they take together or against one another in the days to come. The tension within the camp grows almost immediately after the initial encounters. Trevor's unpredictability, once a source of amusement, begins to strain the gang's cohesion. Dutch, ever the opportunist, proposes a bold plan, a train heist on the outskirts of Valentine. It is a mission that requires precision, timing, and cooperation. Trevor, of course, interprets this as an invitation to improve the plan. He begins pacing back and forth, muttering about explosives, trajectories, and tactical maneuvers that involve everything from rolling barrels to dangling ropes. Arthur watches quietly, knowing that any misstep could lead to disaster, while Micah mutters under his breath about how this psycho will ruin everything. Trevor, oblivious to their concerns, is fully immersed in his own version of the plan, a plan that is part genius, part lunacy, and entirely Trevor Philips. When the day of the heist arrives, the stark contrast between Trevor's approach and the gang's methodical precision becomes apparent. Dutch and Arthur move carefully, positioning men along the tracks, timing every signal, calculating the risk at every turn. Trevor, on the other hand, rides ahead, laughing loudly, waving his arms at the train as if it were a roller coaster, shouting instructions to imaginary accomplices. When the engine appears over the horizon, Trevor leaps from his horse, swinging from the caboose's side railing in a move that would terrify any sane outlaw. He begins tossing improvised explosives at the tracks, some of which work spectacularly, derailing carriages and sending guards flying, while others explode harmlessly, causing panic but little damage. The gang, simultaneously horrified and impressed, adjusts on the fly, realizing that Trevor's chaotic methods, while dangerous, are undeniably effective. Arthur finds himself shoulder to shoulder with Trevor, forced to adapt to a level of unpredictability he has never encountered. Where Arthur relies on patience and careful timing, Trevor reacts instinctively, violently, and often illogically. Yet against all odds, these opposing approaches complement one another, creating a rhythm of controlled chaos. Trevor throws a guard overboard, grabs a lever meant to slow the train, and yells for Arthur to do something, cowboy. Arthur responds with precision, neutralizing threats and securing loot, all while keeping an eye on Trevor's manic energy to ensure it does not spiral entirely out of control. Dutch, watching from a safe distance, allows a grin to cross his face. The result is a heist that is messy, destructive, and spectacular. A fusion of old-world discipline and new-world chaos. Micah, predictably, is not satisfied with playing second fiddle to Trevor. The two men clash repeatedly during the operation, their competition escalating as they both attempt to assert dominance. Micah's calculated cruelty and Trevor's impulsive violence create moments of tension that threaten to derail the mission entirely. At one point, they confront each other mid-heist, rolling across the roof of a moving train, fists flying, as Arthur and a few others intervene to prevent catastrophe. Trevor, however, thrives in these moments, turning conflict into advantage, using the distraction to neutralize additional threats, and leaving the gang stunned at how his insanity can simultaneously jeopardize and save the operation. The fallout from the heist further emphasizes the clash of ideals. Dutch praises the ingenuity, seeing Trevor's reckless energy as a tool to expand the gang's influence and power. Arthur, however, is reflective, recognizing that Trevor's presence brings both advantage and unprecedented risk. Every bold action has consequences, and Trevor's refusal to respect boundaries means those consequences could escalate beyond their control at any moment. Micah, increasingly resentful, begins plotting how to outmaneuver Trevor, setting the stage for deeper rivalry and conflict within the gang. Trevor, as usual, seems blissfully unaware of the tension he has created, already planning the next act of mayhem, seeing the frontier not as a world to navigate carefully, but as a playground to dominate completely. Even outside the gang's immediate operations, Trevor's influence is felt. The local towns, already rattled by his initial antics, now face a new level of terror. Lawmen attempt to respond, only to find themselves outmatched, outwitted, and in some cases completely bewildered. Farmers and merchants speak in hushed tones of the man who rides like a whirlwind and fights like a demon, and the legend of Trevor Philips spreads through the frontier as quickly as any story told around a campfire. The clash of ideals is no longer theoretical. It is tangible, and it shapes the way everyone in the region reacts. Trevor represents chaos unbound, a philosophy of action without compromise, and it collides directly with the structured, honor-bound ethos of the Linde gang. By the end of the first full week working alongside the gang, the stakes are clear. Trevor is indispensable and unpredictable, brilliant and terrifying, a wild card whose presence challenges every assumption about loyalty, morality, and control. Dutch sees opportunity, Arthur sees danger, Micah sees a rival, and Trevor sees nothing but endless possibilities. The frontier itself seems to pulse under the energy he brings, wild, dangerous, and transformed. In this crucible of chaos and order, the stage is set for even greater clashes, for alliances that will be tested, and for conflicts that will force every member of the gang to confront the limits of their patience, courage, and ideology. The days that follow are a study in chaos meeting order, a collision of two very different philosophies that refuses to settle. Trevor's presence is no longer a novelty. It is a disruption. Dutch attempts to channel his energy, using Trevor's wild tactics to strike fear into rival gangs, intimidate lawmen, and expand the gang's influence across the territory. Yet the very unpredictability that makes Trevor valuable also destabilizes every carefully laid plan. A routine supply run becomes a spectacle of destruction when Trevor decides to improve efficiency by throwing crates from wagons into the path of pursuing lawmen. Arthur, ever the pragmatist, is forced to clean up after him, patching fences, calming terrified townsfolk, and neutralizing threats that Trevor's improvisation has inadvertently created. Micah, watching, grows increasingly bitter. He cannot understand how Trevor can upend every plan and yet somehow emerge as a force that Dutch admires rather than punishes. Trevor thrives in this tension, feeding off the reactions of those around him. He wanders into camp one morning with a wide grin, holding what he claims is a modern grenade, which is in reality a poorly assembled explosive device made from gunpowder, tin cans, and duct tape. Dutch raises an eyebrow, amused, while Arthur's jaw tightens, calculating the potential fallout. Micah is immediately suspicious, already plotting how to undermine Trevor's growing influence. Trevor demonstrates the device by tossing it toward a nearby pile of logs, the resultant explosion sending a cloud of dirt, smoke, and splintered wood into the air. He laughs uncontrollably, yelling, "See? Chaos is the future?" Dutch shakes his head, both impressed and cautious, while Arthur mutters, "This man will be the end of us if we're not careful." In these small moments, the philosophical clash between methodical planning and unrestrained chaos is crystallized. The philosophical tension extends beyond mere combat or destruction. It begins to affect the very way the gang operates. Dutch insists on loyalty, careful timing, and respect for the fragile balance of power in the region. Trevor ignores these boundaries, often taking risks that no one else would dare, forcing Dutch and Arthur to adjust, improvise, and sometimes simply follow his lead. In one notable instance, the gang attempts a coordinated ambush on a rival faction, but Trevor arrives early, sets off improvised charges, and engages enemies in a way that initially seems reckless. Yet his chaos creates openings that Arthur and Dutch can exploit, turning what could have been a failed operation into a stunning, if unconventional, success. Micah, infuriated that he cannot predict or control the outcome, begins to openly challenge Trevor, creating a simmering rivalry that adds another layer of tension to the gang's already precarious dynamics. Trevor's unpredictability also exposes moral fault lines within the gang. Arthur, who has always navigated the fine line between honor and necessity, begins to question the cost of allowing Trevor's methods. Civilians are frightened, property is destroyed, and the line between survival and wanton violence blurs with each action. Dutch, by contrast, seems almost intoxicated by the potential for spectacle, seeing Trevor as a living embodiment of the audacity he has always preached. The contrast is stark. One man operating without conscience, another constrained by principle, and a third, Micah, seeking to dominate through control and intimidation. The philosophical debate is no longer theoretical. It is enacted in every robbery, every confrontation, and every calculated explosion. The tension reaches its peak during a planned train heist in the Northern Territories. Dutch outlines the operation meticulously, positioning men along the tracks, coordinating entry points, and timing each stage to the second. Trevor, of course, disregards nearly all instructions. He lobs explosives at random sections of the train, yells instructions at horses and bystanders alike, and occasionally disappears into the landscape, only to reappear at the most chaotic moments. Arthur struggles to anticipate his actions, Micah fumes at the unpredictability, and Dutch, against his better judgment, allows Trevor to operate, fascinated by the audacity and potential outcomes. The heist unfolds like a ballet of controlled chaos, with Trevor as both the instigator and the unpredictable element that keeps everyone on edge. When the train finally comes to a halt, the gang surveys the results. An enormous haul, scattered injuries, and a level of destruction previously unseen. Dutch praises the ingenuity, Arthur calculates the costs, and Micah, humiliated and enraged, begins plotting retaliation. Even as the gang adapts to Trevor, he continues to challenge the limits of their philosophy. He wanders into towns uninvited, confronts rival gangs with reckless bravado, and disregards social norms with gleeful abandon. Arthur begins to see the cost of every action, the long-term consequences that Trevor ignores in favor of instant gratification. Dutch sees opportunity, recognizing that Trevor's chaos can achieve results impossible through conventional methods. Micah's jealousy and aggression grow daily, creating a tense, combustible environment. Trevor, as always, is unconcerned with these dynamics, focused entirely on pushing boundaries, testing limits, and leaving an indelible mark on the world he has entered. By the end of the week, the von der Linde gang is irrevocably changed. Plans are executed differently. Towns are permanently wary of the gang's presence, and the philosophical tension between order and chaos, loyalty and unpredictability, honor and unrestrained action reaches a boiling point. Trevor has proven that he is not merely a visitor. He is a force that challenges the very foundations of the gang's ideology. Dutch sees a new form of power. Arthur sees a dangerous variable. Micah sees a rival to his influence. And Trevor sees only possibilities, unbound and infinite. The stage is set for the next level of conflict, a confrontation that will test the gang's cohesion, their morality, and the limits of Trevor's chaotic genius in the unforgiving world of the Old West. The tipping point comes faster than anyone expects. Trevor's unpredictability, once a source of amusement and occasional advantage, now begins to strain the gang's cohesion in ways that cannot be ignored. Dutch calls a council meeting in the camp, gathering Arthur, Micah, and the others around a rough-hewn table. The conversation is tense, the air thick with dust and uncertainty. Dutch praises Trevor's results, emphasizing the creativity, fearlessness, and sheer audacity that have made recent operations unexpectedly successful. He speaks of opportunity, vision, and evolution, describing Trevor's chaos as a tool to expand the gang's influence beyond what any man could achieve with conventional planning. Trevor, of course, interrupts constantly, shouting ideas, gesturing wildly, and occasionally throwing objects across the table to demonstrate points that only he understands. Micah seethes, Arthur remains stoic, and the others shift nervously, acutely aware that this meeting, like so many moments with Trevor, teeters between insight and disaster. Arthur finally speaks, his voice calm but firm, outlining the dangers that Trevor represents. Every town that has been terrorized, every plan derailed by overzealous improvisation, every civilian frightened or harmed. These are costs that cannot be ignored. He warns that while chaos can be effective, it must be controlled, or it will destroy everything they have worked to build. Dutch listens, nods politely, but his eyes betray fascination. He sees in Trevor a force that could elevate the gang to legendary status if properly channeled. Micah interrupts, accusing Trevor of arrogance and recklessness, sparking a heated argument that borders on physical confrontation before Dutch steps in to mediate. Trevor, for his part, grins and cackles at the tension, seeing it as fuel rather than conflict. The ideological divide is now undeniable. Trevor embodies pure, unbound action. While Arthur represents calculated restraint, Dutch seeks to harness chaos for vision, and Micah desires control and dominance. The next operation highlights just how volatile this mixture has become. The gang targets a wealthy ranch on the outskirts of Rhodes, a high-stakes robbery requiring coordination, stealth, and timing. Dutch outlines the plan with meticulous care, assigning roles and emphasizing caution. Trevor naturally sees the plan as a suggestion rather than a rule. Before the gang has even reached the property, he is already setting traps, improvising distractions, and testing weapons in ways no one could anticipate. The operation unfolds like a storm. Gates are blown open prematurely, guards are incapacitated in unpredictable ways, and Trevor, laughing manically, rides straight into the heart of the ranch, firing indiscriminately while Arthur and the gang scramble to maintain control. Yet against all odds, the operation succeeds. Loot is secured, threats are neutralized, and the gang survives intact, but the cost is evident. Property is destroyed, civilians are terrified, and the risk of law enforcement retaliation has increased exponentially. Dutch, while impressed, begins to realize that controlling Trevor is a delicate art. Trevor does not conform to authority, does not respect planning, and views rules as suggestions at best. Yet his effectiveness cannot be ignored. He has proven that chaos, when applied correctly, can achieve results no one else could accomplish. Arthur, however, is uneasy. He understands the short-term benefits but fears the long-term consequences. Micah, meanwhile, becomes increasingly hostile, openly challenging Trevor, trying to assert dominance in ways that are both petty and dangerous. The ideological clash has now evolved into a real struggle for influence within the gang, and the tension is palpable. Trevor himself is unbothered by these power dynamics. He views the gang as a stage, the frontier as a playground, and every interaction as an opportunity to test limits. He continues to push boundaries, experimenting with explosives, wildlife, and improvised combat tactics, all while observing the reactions of the gang members. Dutch marvels at the audacity, Arthur calculates the risks, and Micah seethes, already plotting revenge or sabotage. Even the wilderness seems to react to Trevor's presence. Horses bolt at his approach, coyotes scatter, and the wind itself carries whispers of his chaos through the valleys. In this environment, Trevor is both unstoppable and unpredictable, a variable that reshapes every plan, every strategy, and every relationship. By the end of the week, the Van der Linde gang has changed irreversibly. Plans are executed differently, operations are more dangerous, yet unexpectedly effective, and every member has been forced to confront the limits of patience, trust, and morality. Trevor has proven that he is not merely an ally or a nuisance. He is a force that challenges everything the gang believes about order, loyalty, and control. Dutch sees potential, Arthur sees danger, Micah sees rivalry, and Trevor sees opportunity. The ideological clash has set the stage for the next level of conflict, a frontier where chaos and order collide with consequences that will test loyalty, skill, and survival to the very limits. The collision of ideals is no longer theoretical. It is real, it is immediate, and it will shape every action the gang takes in the days to come. Trevor, perched atop a ridge overlooking the valley once more, watches the sun set in a blaze of orange and crimson. He lights a cigar, grins manically, and mutters to no one in particular. Rules are for losers. Let's see how far we can push this world. The frontier has met its match, and the Van der Linde gang will never be the same. The battle of philosophy, of action versus restraint, has only just begun. Trevor Philips, now fully acclimated to the rhythms and dangers of the Old West, begins to extend his influence beyond the Van der Linde gang, treating the frontier as a canvas for his chaotic artistry. The towns, which once operated under a fragile balance of law, order, and fear, are now unwitting participants in Trevor's unpredictable theater. He rides into roads mid-morning, a dust cloud trailing behind him, yelling at no one in particular about the inefficiencies of frontier banking and the lack of modern infrastructure. Citizens scatter, children cling to their mothers, and local sheriffs attempt to intercept him, only to be met with wild improvisation. Trevor swings from wagons, vaults over fences, and fires his pistol with manic precision, creating a spectacle that is both terrifying and strangely mesmerizing. The frontier itself seems to bend around him, a world that has never seen energy, audacity, and raw chaos combined in such a way. Trevor's influence extends immediately into the surrounding wilderness. He encounters a pack of wolves and, instead of fleeing as a normal man might, he engages them with a combination of bravado and clever improvisation. Using a series of improvised traps and makeshift noisemakers, he manipulates the wolves into scattering rival hunters who had been tracking him, turning a potential threat into a tactical advantage. Animals of all kinds respond to his presence with nervous energy. Horses bolt, birds scatter in panic, and deer flee in every direction. Trevor finds this thrilling, laughing manically as he observes the world reacting to him. Every corner of the frontier becomes a testing ground, every encounter an opportunity to assert dominance and experiment with chaos as a tool. Outside of combat, Trevor's personality disrupts social norms with equal intensity. He enters saloons uninvited, mocking bartenders about their ancient inventory systems, and challenges patrons to absurd contests of skill or strength. Townfolk, long accustomed to outlaws and gunslingers, are both fascinated and horrified. A poker game turns into a melee when Trevor, dissatisfied with the stakes, starts throwing cards and flipping tables while explaining the superior odds of modern mathematics, a concept no one in 1899 can comprehend. Lawmen attempt intervention, only to be outmaneuvered in a series of improvisational escapes, chase sequences, and strategic diversions that defy logic. By the end of the day, entire towns are whispering about the man who rides like the wind, fights like a hurricane, and speaks like a prophet from another era. Trevor's chaos does not stop at individual towns. He begins targeting supply routes, ambushing wagons, and disrupting commerce across the frontier. He sets traps that are both ingenious and reckless, rolling barrels into strategic choke points, improvising explosives from gunpowder and household materials, and using the natural environment to create diversions that allow him to escape almost at will. In one daring encounter, he lures a convoy into a narrow canyon, causing a series of collisions and explosions that leaves wagons overturned, horses scattered, and guards incapacitated. Trevor laughs as he surveys the aftermath, finding beauty in the destruction, satisfaction in the chaos, and endless opportunity in the reactions of those around him. The ripple effects of Trevor's actions are immediate. Rival gangs are forced to adapt, towns begin to implement extra security, and law enforcement mobilizes in unprecedented numbers. Yet no matter the opposition, Trevor adapts faster, improvising tactics that seem impossible within the constraints of the Old West. He employs guerrilla-style attacks, sets clever distractions, and manipulates both the environment and the people in it to maintain dominance. In every town, on every trail, the whisper spreads. There is a man who cannot be predicted, a force that cannot be contained, and anyone who attempts to stop him will pay a steep price. Trevor's relationship with the Linde gang evolves alongside his independent exploits. Dutch continues to marvel at the sheer audacity and effectiveness of his methods, seeing a new form of power that could elevate the gang's influence across the entire frontier. Arthur becomes more vigilant, recognizing that while Trevor's contributions are undeniable, every success comes with increasing danger to the gang's reputation, safety, and cohesion. Micah's rivalry intensifies as he grows increasingly obsessed with outmatching Trevor, attempting to assert his influence in the very operations Trevor has already destabilized. The dynamic is tense and volatile, a combination of admiration, fear, and competition that drives the gang to adapt in ways they have never imagined. Trevor's escapades also draw the attention of more organized law enforcement and the wealthier inhabitants of the frontier. Town sheriffs, bounty hunters, and private militias attempted to predict his movements, only to be frustrated at every turn. He anticipates ambushes with intuitive cunning, sets improvised countermeasures, and turns the terrain into his ally. A mountain pass becomes a maze of traps, a river crossing a gauntlet of distractions, and every encounter a chance for both entertainment and domination. Trevor treats the frontier as if it were a video game in real time, improvising strategies, testing boundaries, and pushing the limits of what is possible in 1899. Trevor's impact on the frontier begins to ripple outward, affecting not only towns but rival gangs who have grown used to the predictability of the Old West. Word spreads quickly of a man whose methods defy logic, whose audacity surpasses even the most notorious outlaws, and whose violence is only matched by his unpredictable humor. He targets a gang operating near the Dakota River, notorious for extorting local settlers. Trevor doesn't approach cautiously. He rides straight into their camp, guns blazing, shouting taunts about their incompetence, and making exaggerated claims about future warfare techniques. Explosions rock the campsite, fires ignite in random directions, and horses scatter as he improvises with dynamite, makeshift traps, and sheer intimidation. Within minutes, the rival gang is in disarray, fleeing into the trees, and Trevor stands victorious, laughing wildly, as if the world were his personal stage. Arthur and Dutch, observing from a distance, cannot help but marvel. The result is spectacular, effective, and terrifyingly chaotic. Even as his exploits grow, Trevor's relationship with the Linde gang remains complicated. Dutch encourages him to channel this chaos strategically, envisioning campaigns that could extend the gang's influence across multiple counties. Arthur, however, becomes increasingly wary, recognizing the mounting risk. Every action Trevor takes outside of their control introduces new threats. Lawmen tighten their networks, towns fortify defenses, and rival gangs adapt their strategies, all while Trevor gleefully escalates the destruction. Micah, meanwhile, continues to fume, attempting to provoke Trevor into mistakes while simultaneously trying to emulate his audacity, a combination that results in repeated clashes and near disasters during joint operations. Trevor, unfazed, treats these rivalries as another form of entertainment, turning conflict into a game and leaving chaos as his calling card. Trevor's rampage is not limited to human targets. The wilderness becomes a testing ground for his improvisation. He manipulates natural hazards, loose rocks, narrow ravines, sudden river currents, to create improvised traps for pursuing foes or to redirect wildlife in ways that destabilize enemies. A bear, initially a threat, becomes part of his tactical advantage as he drives rival bounty hunters into its path with careful timing and loud distractions. Wolves, crows, and deer all react instinctively to his presence, giving Trevor a sense of control over both the natural and human elements of the frontier. Every encounter reinforces his growing legend, a man who is simultaneously terrifying, uncatchable, and brilliant in his manic unpredictability. The frontier towns begin to feel the cumulative impact of Trevor's actions. Merchants shutter windows in fear, sheriffs increase patrols, and citizens whisper about the man who defies every law and expectation. Despite the terror he inspires, there is also a strange admiration. Stories of his exploits spread quickly, and some townsfolk can't help but be impressed by the audacity and resourcefulness of this man who treats the world like a personal playground. In these interactions, Trevor's philosophy becomes clear. The Old West, with all its rules, limits, and codes, is a challenge to be tested, bent, and ultimately conquered through audacity and unpredictability. Trevor's most audacious operation yet comes in the form of an attack on a well-defended supply train heading to a wealthy estate near Valentine. Unlike previous encounters, this requires coordination, improvisation, and relentless risk-taking. Trevor devises a plan that combines explosives, environmental hazards, and a series of diversions designed to overwhelm both the guards and any local lawman. The operation begins at dawn. He rolls barrels down cliffs to block pursuers, sets up fire distractions along the tracks, and engages guards with terrifying precision while simultaneously mocking their confusion. The result is spectacular. The train is stopped, the loot is secured, and enemies are left battered, terrified, and disoriented. Dutch marvels at the success. Arthur calculates the mountain risks, and Micah's jealousy reaches a boiling point, simmering with the certainty that Trevor has outperformed him once again. Trevor's rampage is more than physical. It is psychological. His unpredictability forces everyone around him to adapt constantly, creating a culture of tension, awe, and fear. Lawmen cannot predict his movements, rival gangs hesitate, townsfolk panic, and even his own allies are kept on edge. The frontier, a land long defined by careful planning, loyalty, and strategy, is now a stage for improvisation, chaos, and audacious experimentation. Trevor thrives in this environment, shaping both the physical and psychological landscape in ways that no one could have anticipated. By the end of the week, the frontier has been irrevocably altered. Rivers run with debris from his improvised diversions, towns are wary, rival gangs cautious, and the Linde gang is caught in the tension between admiration, fear, and rivalry. Trevor stands atop a ridge overlooking a valley, surveying the destruction with manic glee, cigar smoke curling into the wind. For him, this is only the beginning. The frontier is vast, law enforcement is reactive, rival gangs are predictable in their panic, and he is unstoppable. Trevor has truly unleashed himself, and the ripple effects of his chaos are only starting to reshape the world around him. Trevor's reputation spreads faster than smoke across the frontier, and soon multiple gangs begin to take notice. One afternoon, a coalition of 3 smaller outlaw factions decides to band together to take him down, hoping that his unpredictable destruction can finally be contained. Trevor, however, treats this not as a threat, but as an opportunity for one of his signature spectacles. He sets traps along the hillsides outside Valentine, rolls boulders down narrow passes, and scatters barrels filled with gunpowder to create diversions and explosions that confound the approaching gangs. When the first group rides into view, Trevor leaps from a ridge, firing in every direction with manic precision, and quickly turns the encounter into a chaotic ballet of destruction. Horses panic, riders tumble from saddles, and the valley becomes a theater of devastation, with Trevor at the center, laughing as if conducting an orchestra of chaos. The Linde gang watches from the edges, a mixture of awe, fear, and growing anxiety written on their faces. Dutch is thrilled by the audacity and sheer effectiveness of Trevor's methods, seeing a new form of power that could cement the gang's dominance across the frontier. Arthur, however, is tense, calculating every possible consequence. Innocent lives lost, increased law enforcement attention, and the potential backlash from rival factions. Micah, furious that he cannot match or predict Trevor, grows reckless, attempting to take independent actions that only complicate the already chaotic battlefield. Trevor, in turn, treats Micah's interference as a form of entertainment, using his rival's aggression to manipulate the battle further, often putting both friend and foe in positions that test courage, timing, and survival. By the time the dust settles, Trevor has routed all 3 gangs, leaving them scattered, demoralized, and badly injured. The landscape bears the scars of the encounter, trees splintered, fences knocked over, and the valley littered with debris from improvised explosives. Townsfolk returning to the area are both terrified and impressed, whispering about the man who cannot be stopped, the outlaw who rewrites the rules of engagement, and the force that has made even seasoned criminals look like amateurs. Trevor surveys the scene with manic satisfaction, hands on hips, a grin stretching across his face, muttering to no one in particular about how much more fun the frontier could be if every lawman and outlaw simply played along. Trevor's actions now begin to draw attention from more formal powers. Federal marshals and bounty hunters, many of them hardened veterans of frontier law, begin coordinating to track him down. They set up ambushes, lay traps, and attempt to predict his movements using logic and experience. Trevor, however, treats these attempts as puzzles to solve in real time. He anticipates ambushes, manipulates the terrain to his advantage, and improvises attacks that are simultaneously absurd and terrifyingly effective. Entire squads of lawmen are outmaneuvered, sent tumbling into rivers, exploding wagons, or precarious cliffside encounters, leaving behind stunned survivors who return with wild tales of the man who fights like a hurricane and moves like a phantom. Even within the Linde gang, Trevor's influence begins to reshape behavior. Dutch encourages bolder operations, seeing the frontier as a chessboard where chaos can be wielded strategically. Arthur adapts reluctantly, using his discipline to contain the fallout from Trevor's wild ideas, often improvising alongside him in ways that challenge his own sense of order. Micah, growing increasingly obsessed, begins taking reckless actions to prove himself, sparking conflicts that sometimes escalate into open confrontations within the camp. The philosophical clash is now not only ideological, but operational. Trevor's methods have forced the gang to reconsider every strategy, every boundary, and every assumption about what it means to survive in a world defined by danger and lawlessness. Trevor's chaos also begins to affect the economic and social balance of the frontier. Supply routes are disrupted, trade caravans are ambushed, and towns once considered safe now brace for his unpredictable arrival. Wealthy ranchers hire private militias, sheriffs call in reinforcements from neighboring counties, and rumors of Trevor's exploits spread to every corner of the territory. Yet the more the frontier mobilizes against him, the more creative and daring his tactics become. Rivers are manipulated, hillsides converted into deadly mazes, and wildlife used as unexpected allies in ambushes. Every move is calculated for maximum unpredictability, a combination of instinct, madness, and improvisational genius that keeps the frontier perpetually off balance. By nightfall, Trevor stands atop a ridge overlooking the chaos he has wrought. Fires burn in the valley below, scattered horsemen retreat into the shadows, and the Linde gang watches from a safe distance, caught between admiration and unease. Dutch sees the potential for dominance like never before. Arthur sees danger that grows by the day, and Micah sees a rival he may never overcome. Trevor lights a cigar, inhales deeply, and laughs, the sound echoing across the valleys, a declaration of ownership over a world that refuses to bend to rules or expectations. The frontier has been transformed, reshaped in the image of chaos, and Trevor Philips has proven that he is not merely an outlaw. He is a force of nature, untamed, unbound, and unstoppable. As the dust settles across the frontier, the true scope of Trevor's impact becomes clear. Entire regions have felt his presence. Towns whisper his name in equal parts fear and awe. Rival gangs hesitate before moving, and lawmen find their strategies rendered ineffective by a man who refuses to operate by any rules but his own. Trevor, however, is already looking ahead, viewing every setback as a challenge, every confrontation as an opportunity to escalate. He rides through valleys and over ridges, surveying his handiwork with manic satisfaction, noting which towns have improved defenses, which gangs have learned caution, and which paths are still open for maximum chaos. Every detail informs his next plan, a mental map of destruction and spectacle that grows more elaborate with each passing day. The Linde gang, though impressed by the tangible results of Trevor's actions, begins to experience the real strain of his presence. Dutch sees a new form of opportunity, the chance to dominate the frontier in ways previously unimaginable. But even his optimism is tinged with caution. Arthur, increasingly wary, realizes that Trevor's methods, though effective, push the limits of survival and morality further than the gang has ever tested. Micah, consumed by jealousy and rivalry, openly challenges Trevor, often escalating conflicts in ways that create near disasters during joint operations. The philosophical and operational tension that began in their first encounters has now become an omnipresent force, influencing every decision, every heist, and every interaction. Trevor's audacity also begins to provoke larger-scale consequences outside the gang. Wealthy ranchers who have been victims of his attacks hire larger, more organized private militias, while regional law enforcement forms joint patrols to anticipate his movements. Trevor treats these efforts as an elaborate game, exploiting predictable tactics, using diversions, and employing improvised explosives and creative environmental manipulation to outmaneuver his pursuers at every turn. In one particularly audacious operation, he lures a cavalry squad into a narrow canyon, sending boulders cascading down from the cliffs while simultaneously igniting small fires to confuse both horse and rider. The result is catastrophic for the attackers, a scene of chaos and destruction that cements Trevor's reputation as untouchable, while further demonstrating the gulf between his methods and the more cautious, calculated strategies of the frontier's lawmen. Despite his independent exploits, Trevor remains entwined with the Linde gang. Dutch continues to attempt to harness his chaos strategically, often sketching out larger-scale plans that rely on Trevor's improvisation as a force multiplier. Arthur, meanwhile, is forced to adapt constantly, improvising alongside Trevor while containing the fallout from collateral damage and unpredictable consequences. Micah, growing increasingly reckless in his attempts to challenge or match Trevor, becomes a volatile wild card within the gang itself, heightening the tension and creating moments of near violence between allies. These dynamics illustrate the profound impact of Trevor's presence. He is not only reshaping the frontier, but fundamentally altering the social and operational fabric of the gang. Trevor's influence reaches towns and settlements in unexpected ways. Some merchants, initially terrified, begin to pay him a strange sort of respect, acknowledging that attempting to oppose him directly is folly. Children whisper tales of the man who rides like lightning and strikes like a hurricane, while adults scramble to adapt, fortifying homes, hiring extra guards, or simply moving operations out of his path. Even wildlife becomes part of his tactical environment. Horses panic at his approach, wolves and coyotes scatter in organized chaos, and birds lift into the sky to signal danger long before human adversaries can react. Trevor's understanding of this environment, and his ability to exploit it, turns every natural and human element into a tool in his ever-expanding repertoire of unpredictability. The culmination of this period of chaos comes during a massive confrontation at a crossroads where several rival gangs, law enforcement, and bounty hunters converge, hoping to finally end Trevor's rampage. Trevor anticipates the convergence with manic genius. He sets improvised traps along every approach, ignites diversions to scatter groups, and uses every environmental advantage imaginable. The resulting battle is a cacophony of explosions, gunfire, and improvised destruction that leaves the valley littered with debris and survivors bewildered at what just transpired. Trevor's manic laughter echoes across the terrain as he surveys the battlefield, completely unscathed and seemingly untouchable. Dutch, watching from a safe distance, marvels at the spectacle. Arthur, ever cautious, calculates the mounting consequences and the fragile line between success and catastrophe. Micah, humiliated yet still defiant, seethes at being outperformed once again, solidifying the growing rivalry between the two men. By the end of this period, the frontier has been irreversibly altered. Supply routes are disrupted, rival gangs are demoralized, towns are fortified, and law enforcement remains on high alert. The Linde gang has been forced to adapt, incorporating elements of Trevor's chaos into their operations while contending with the moral and operational risks that accompany it. Trevor himself, perched atop a ridge at sunset, surveys the transformed landscape, cigar smoke curling into the wind, a manic grin stretching across his face. He has proven that he is not merely an outlaw in a new world. He is a force of nature, a living embodiment of chaos that the frontier cannot contain, a man who reshapes everything he touches. The stage is now set for even greater confrontations, higher stakes and consequences that will not only test Trevor, but also the Linde gang and the fragile balance of power in the frontier. Trevor has been unleashed, the frontier has been transformed, and the echoes of his chaos will resonate across every town, trail, and valley. Every man, woman, and outlaw in the region must now reckon with the arrival of a force that is equal parts genius, madness, and destruction. The frontier will never be the same again. The frontier, now thoroughly unsettled by Trevor Philips' presence, becomes a landscape not only of chaos, but of opportunity. In this new reality, alliances and rivalries form in unexpected ways, each influenced by fear, necessity, or sheer fascination with the man who defies all convention. Trevor's unpredictable genius forces everyone to reconsider their positions, both within the Linde gang and among the surrounding outlaw factions. Dutch, ever the opportunist, begins seeking out potential alliances that could exploit Trevor's chaos while maintaining the gang's dominance. He arranges secretive meetings with lesser-known outlaws and disgruntled frontier merchants, offering them protection, a share of spoils, and the promise of power. The gambit is risky, but Dutch sees it as necessary. Trevor's energy is wild, but harnessed correctly, it could solidify the gang's position across the frontier in ways that were previously impossible. Arthur Morgan, ever the cautious pragmatist, watches these developments with a mix of concern and strategic calculation. He recognizes that alliances built around Trevor's chaos are inherently unstable. Partners motivated by fear or opportunism may turn on the gang at the first sign of weakness, and enemies already humiliated by Trevor's exploits may unite against him in retaliation. Arthur begins quietly observing both friends and potential allies, noting strengths, weaknesses, and tendencies, preparing for the moment when careful planning will be required to survive the inevitable backlash. Even as he contemplates these risks, he cannot deny that Trevor's methods have delivered results that no traditional strategy could achieve, and he begins adapting his own approach, blending caution with improvisation in a way that reflects the man he has reluctantly come to respect and fear. Micah Bell's rivalry with Trevor escalates with every operation. The two men clash constantly, each vying for dominance, recognition, and influence over the gang. Micah attempts to anticipate Trevor's moves, often recklessly, while Trevor thrives in unpredictability, turning Micah's efforts into either comic spectacle or catastrophic failure. Their confrontations are not confined to violence alone. Psychological warfare becomes a part of their daily interactions. Micah taunts, plots, and manipulates, while Trevor responds with a combination of chaos, cunning, and unhinged ingenuity, forcing both allies and enemies to adapt to the tension between them. The rivalry is intoxicating and dangerous, driving both men to extremes and testing the limits of loyalty, patience, and self-preservation within the gang itself. Outside the gang, Trevor's audacity inspires new relationships and antagonisms. Smaller outlaw factions, initially intimidated, approach him with offers of collaboration, eager to exploit the chaos he generates while hoping to avoid direct conflict. Some townsfolk, long victims of frontier instability, recognize the potential to benefit from his presence, hiring him as a form of mercenary justice or protection against rival gangs. Trevor, as always, evaluates every opportunity with manic curiosity, weighing chaos against profit, entertainment against advantage, and potential danger against personal amusement. His alliances are fleeting, opportunistic, and unpredictable, yet often highly effective. Partners and enemies alike are forced to accept that the rules of engagement have changed, that Trevor Philips operates outside the moral and tactical framework they understand, and that survival requires adaptation, cunning, and a willingness to embrace the unexpected. One notable alliance forms with a former bounty hunter named Elias Ward, a cunning and pragmatic man who recognizes both the genius and danger of Trevor's methods. Initially wary, Elias approaches the gang with an offer. His tracking skills, knowledge of the frontier, and expertise in ambush tactics in exchange for a share of spoils and temporary protection from law enforcement. Trevor, intrigued by Elias's confidence and strategic mind, accepts the partnership with a mix of skepticism and manic enthusiasm. Their combined efforts during a coordinated ambush of a rival gang demonstrate the power of controlled chaos. Trevor improvises, Elias predicts and manipulates enemy movements, and the Linde gang executes the plan with precision, resulting in an overwhelming victory that cements the temporary alliance. Dutch, watching from a safe distance, cannot help but marvel at the fusion of unpredictable genius and calculated strategy. envisioning how such partnerships might reshape the balance of power across the frontier. However, not all alliances are successful. Rival gangs that attempt to approach Trevor out of fear or greed quickly discover that trust and loyalty are foreign concepts to him. He manipulates, provokes, and outwits these groups, often leaving them humiliated, injured, or entirely incapacitated. In one instance, a notorious gang from the Northern Territories attempts to lure him into an ambush near a canyon. Trevor anticipates every move, using the terrain, improvised explosives, and psychological manipulation to turn the ambush back on his attackers. Within minutes, the gang is scattered, their resources destroyed, and their leaders captured and humiliated. This incident spreads through the frontier as both a warning and a legend. Trevor Philips is a man who cannot be predicted, bargained with, or tamed. Even within the Linde gang, unexpected rivalries continue to emerge. Micah, humiliated by his inability to outmaneuver Trevor, begins plotting subtler acts of sabotage and provocation, seeking opportunities to assert control or destabilize Trevor's influence. Arthur remains vigilant, attempting to mediate and mitigate the fallout of both external conflicts and internal tensions. Dutch, seeing opportunity in every confrontation, encourages bold action while balancing the competing egos within the gang. Trevor, unbound by loyalty or caution, exploits these dynamics with relentless energy, ensuring that every alliance and rivalry is as unpredictable as it is impactful. Trevor's chaotic presence forces the frontier itself to adapt. Towns begin implementing unpredictable security measures, rival gangs coordinate in unprecedented ways, and lawmen collaborate to try to contain the escalating disorder. Yet Trevor continues to anticipate, improvise, and exploit these adaptations. He employs wildlife, terrain, and psychological tactics to maintain dominance, often turning challenges into elaborate displays of ingenuity and destruction. Every town, trail, and valley becomes part of his game, a stage for spectacle, strategy, and survival, forcing both allies and enemies to acknowledge that the rules have fundamentally changed. The fragile web of alliances and rivalries begins to show signs of strain as Trevor's influence grows more pronounced. Some factions that had initially offered cooperation now act out of fear rather than loyalty, testing the limits of what Trevor will tolerate. A minor gang from the Eastern Territories attempts to double-cross him during a supply raid, expecting to exploit his manic tendencies for their gain. Trevor, however, anticipates their duplicity with uncanny precision. Using a combination of improvised traps, psychological manipulation, and environmental tactics, he turns the tables. The gang's leaders are captured, their wagons overturned, and their horses scattered across the valley. Trevor watches from a nearby ridge, grinning manically, while the Linde gang observes the spectacle, a mixture of awe and apprehension written across their faces. Dutch praises the efficiency and audacity, Arthur calculates the collateral risk, and Micah fumes, his rivalry with Trevor deepening with every demonstration of unrestrained genius. The alliances that survive are tenuous at best. Elias Ward, the pragmatic former bounty hunter, continues to work alongside Trevor, but even he recognizes the inherent danger of aligning with someone so unpredictably volatile. The two form a strange synergy. Elias provides calculated strategies, anticipating enemy moves and predicting likely outcomes, while Trevor improvises, turning those predictions into chaotic yet effective actions. Together they execute ambushes on rival gangs, disrupt supply lines, and neutralize threats with a combination of foresight and unpredictability that neither man could achieve alone. Dutch, witnessing the synergy, sees enormous potential, imagining a frontier dominated not only by the Linde gang, but by the unpredictable genius that Trevor embodies, a force that could allow them to seize territory, resources, and influence like never before. Rivalries, however, are no longer confined to external enemies. Within the Linde gang, Tensions escalate as Trevor's influence continues to overshadow Micah. Every successful operation fuels Micah's resentment, and he begins attempting more aggressive interventions, trying to assert control in ways that destabilize joint efforts. Trevor, unbothered, turns these confrontations into opportunities, exploiting Micah's aggression to manipulate both the internal dynamics of the gang and the outcomes of their missions. Arthur, forced into a constant role of mediator and strategist, observes the growing friction with a mixture of concern and admiration, recognizing that while Trevor's chaos is extraordinarily effective, it is also a ticking time bomb for the gang's cohesion and long-term survival. The frontier itself begins to bear the marks of this unstable equilibrium. Towns, previously accustomed to occasional raids and lawless behavior, now implement increasingly erratic security measures, fortifying buildings, hiring private guards, and coordinating local militias. Some attempt to engage Trevor proactively, seeking temporary alliances or paying protection fees to avoid devastation. Others fall victim to his improvisational brilliance, finding themselves ambushed by traps, explosives, and wild environmental tactics that turn the frontier's familiar terrain into a treacherous landscape. Wildlife, too, is harnessed in his strategies. Horses panic in choreographed sequences, wolves disrupt pursuing enemies, and rivers and cliffs are transformed into improvised defensive and offensive mechanisms. Trevor's impact is holistic, touching both the human and natural elements of the frontier in a way that transforms strategy, risk, and perception. A pivotal moment arises when Dutch arranges a coordinated offensive against a fortified rival gang controlling the northern trade routes. The plan is complex, involving multiple teams, precise timing, and strategic placement of resources. Trevor naturally interprets the plan as a loose guideline rather than a set of rules. He improvises at every opportunity, redirecting teams, triggering diversions, and creating explosions in unexpected areas. Elias provides predictive support, adjusting for Trevor's improvisation while reinforcing the Linde gang's effectiveness. The result is a dramatic, chaotic, and overwhelming success. The rival gang is routed, their resources seized, and the northern trade routes effectively dominated. The operation demonstrates the power of unexpected alliances and the perilous thrill of working with someone like Trevor, whose genius is inseparable from his mania. Even as victories accumulate, consequences loom. Law enforcement intensifies their efforts, bounty hunters adapt their strategies, and rival factions begin coordinating in unprecedented ways. The tension within the Linde gang grows as Arthur attempts to mitigate collateral damage and maintain a semblance of order. Dutch is intoxicated by the possibilities, envisioning a future where chaos itself becomes a strategic advantage. Micah, increasingly reckless and bitter, plots against Trevor in subtle yet dangerous ways. Trevor, as always, remains a force unto himself, exploiting every alliance and rivalry, turning threats into opportunities, and ensuring that the frontier remains unpredictable, volatile, and entirely under his influence. By the end of this period, the frontier is transformed. Alliances are tenuous, rivalries are inflamed, and every interaction carries both risk and potential reward. Trevor has proven that he can manipulate the social and operational dynamics of the frontier as easily as he manipulates terrain and combat. The Linde gang is caught in a constant push and pull between opportunity and danger, admiration and fear, loyalty and rivalry. Every action taken now carries consequences that will reverberate through towns, wilderness, and gangs alike. Trevor's presence is no longer a temporary disruption. It has become a permanent, defining factor in the balance of power across the frontier, shaping not only events, but the very character of those who inhabit it. The tension within the Linde gang reaches a fever pitch as Trevor's unpredictable genius continues to redefine their operations. Micah, humiliated by repeated failures to outmaneuver Trevor, becomes openly insubordinate, attempting to undermine operations and assert control in subtle but destabilizing ways. Every time he challenges Trevor, it backfires spectacularly. A diversion meant to sabotage a heist is transformed into a chaotic advantage by Trevor's improvisation, turning Micah's sabotage into either an unintentional trap for enemies or a bizarrely effective tactic that leaves everyone in awe. Arthur, caught in the middle, balances mediation with strategic adjustments, attempting to ensure that the gang's cohesion remains intact while minimizing collateral damage. Dutch, intoxicated by the results, praises Trevor's audacity, seeing in the chaos a tool that could elevate the gang to unprecedented dominance across the frontier. Rival gangs, emboldened by tales of Trevor's exploits, but wary of his unpredictability, attempt coordinated responses. A coalition of 3 regional gangs plots to ambush Trevor during a supply raid near Valentine, expecting that their numerical advantage will overwhelm them. Trevor, however, anticipates their plan with near-prescient intuition. Using a combination of improvised traps, psychological misdirection, and environmental manipulation, he turns the ambush back on the attackers. Boulders tumble from cliffs, fires ignite along anticipated escape routes, and horses are herded into chaotic patterns, leaving the coalition disoriented and humiliated. Trevor's laughter echoes across the valley as he surveys the aftermath, while the Linde gang watches, simultaneously impressed and wary of the man whose unpredictability has now become a tactical asset beyond anyone's comprehension. Even with his external exploits, Trevor continues to test internal alliances. Elias Ward, the pragmatic former bounty hunter, begins to recognize that aligning with Trevor is both incredibly effective and inherently risky. Every operation carries the potential for catastrophic collateral damage, and every moment of improvisation could jeopardize their carefully constructed alliances. Yet the results speak for themselves. Victories that no conventional strategy could achieve, enemies scattered and demoralized, and the Linde gang elevated to a level of dominance that Dutch never dreamed possible. Trevor's genius lies not only in destruction, but in the psychological manipulation of friend and foe alike, forcing every ally and enemy to constantly adapt to his chaotic rhythm. In the towns, the consequences of these alliances and rivalries are increasingly tangible. Merchants and local officials are caught between fear and opportunity, some paying for protection, others fleeing from impending chaos. Civilians whisper about the man who rides like lightning and fights like a storm, their stories blending awe, terror, and disbelief. Law enforcement agencies begin coordinating across counties, creating joint patrols and setting ambushes in an attempt to contain Trevor's influence. These efforts are met with the same brilliance that has defined his entire campaign. Improvised diversions, environmental hazards, and psychological manipulation render organized responses ineffective. The frontier becomes a living testament to the power of unpredictability, a place where conventional wisdom is constantly challenged, and where every action carries both danger and potential reward. Trevor's escalating exploits force the Linde gang to reconsider their operational strategies entirely. Dutch begins to integrate Trevor's chaotic methods into larger campaigns, envisioning coordinated operations that exploit fear, confusion, and spectacle to achieve dominance. Arthur adapts his approach, blending caution with improvisation to manage the fallout from Trevor's unpredictability while maximizing tactical advantage. Micah, consumed by jealousy and rivalry, becomes increasingly reckless, attempting to assert control in ways that often create additional hazards for the gang. The delicate balance between order and chaos, loyalty and competition, becomes a defining aspect of the gang's existence, with Trevor at its epicenter. One particularly daring operation highlights the complexity of these alliances and rivalries. Trevor identifies a wealthy ranch controlled by a rival gang that has been exploiting local settlers and controlling key supply lines. He proposes a joint assault with Elias, coordinating distractions, improvised traps, and environmental manipulation to ensure success. The Van der Linde gang follows his lead, initially cautious but quickly swept into the whirlwind of chaos that defines Trevor's approach. As the plan unfolds, the rival gang is drawn into a series of diversions, explosions, and wild confrontations. Trevor improvises at every turn, turning mistakes into advantages and exploiting the aggressiveness of both allies and enemies. By the end of the day, the rival gang is routed, supplies are secured, and the operation is heralded as both a tactical and psychological masterpiece, leaving survivors terrified and the Van der Linde gang exhilarated and exhausted. The consequences of these operations begin to ripple through the frontier. Lawmen increase patrols and coordinate with rival gangs in unprecedented ways, attempting to contain the chaos that Trevor has unleashed. Towns begin fortifying against unpredictable attacks, merchants hire private guards, and the entire social and operational landscape of the frontier is forced to adapt. Within the Van der Linde gang, tensions remain high as rivalries intensify, alliances shift, and every action carries both opportunity and risk. Trevor's presence has reshaped the rules of engagement entirely, creating a world where unpredictability is the ultimate weapon and survival depends on the ability to adapt to chaos in real time. By nightfall, Trevor stands atop a ridge, overlooking the valley where the latest battle has concluded. Fires smolder, wagons lie overturned, and the Van der Linde gang gathers at a safe distance, both in awe and apprehensive of the man who has changed their world forever. Dutch sees potential for unbounded dominance. Arthur sees the cost of every unrestrained action, and Micah seethes at being outmatched yet again. Trevor lights a cigar, his laughter carrying across the valley, a declaration that the frontier, no matter how organized or fortified, bends to no rules but his own. Alliances have been tested, rivalries intensified, and the frontier has been reshaped. The stage is now set for even greater conflicts as the balance between order, chaos, and loyalty reaches a critical point that will determine the survival of every man, woman, and gang in the region. The fragility of the frontier alliances becomes undeniable as Trevor's chaotic brilliance continues to assert dominance over every interaction. Even those who had initially approached him out of admiration or fear begin to realize that aligning with Trevor is a gamble, one that could as easily end in humiliation or death as in victory. A coalition of town guards and minor outlaw factions attempts to trap him near the edge of the grizzlies, hoping that careful planning, combined with numbers and terrain, will finally neutralize the man who has terrorized the region. Trevor, ever attuned to both human behavior and environmental cues, treats their efforts as a game. He anticipates every movement, improvises distractions that divert attention, and manipulates the landscape so that cliffs, rivers, and forest cover all serve his strategy. By the time the ambush collapses under his manic ingenuity, the coalition lies scattered, their resources destroyed, and the few surviving leaders humiliated. Townsfolk whisper fearfully of the man who laughs in the face of danger, while the Van der Linde gang watches, a mixture of awe, fear, and frustration etched on every face. Within the gang, internal rivalries reach a critical point. Micah, enraged by repeated failures to control or outshine Trevor, begins subtle acts of sabotage, tampering with supplies, questioning strategies, and attempting to sway weaker-willed members to his side. Trevor, perceptive and merciless, exploits these moves, allowing them to create chaos that he then turns into strategic advantages. Every confrontation becomes a lesson in unpredictability. A sabotage meant to undermine operations becomes a trap for pursuing lawmen, a diversion that secures critical resources, or an opportunity to humiliate Micah publicly, further solidifying Trevor's dominance in the social hierarchy of the gang. Arthur, forced into a constant role of mediator, strategizes to contain collateral damage while leveraging Trevor's genius, a delicate balance that strains even his considerable patience and skill. Dutch, ever the visionary, begins to see the full potential of Trevor's methods. He envisions coordinated campaigns where chaos itself is weaponized, towns destabilized, rival gangs manipulated into conflict with each other, and law enforcement drawn into carefully orchestrated traps. Trevor's manic creativity becomes the tool Dutch had long sought but could never fully realize through conventional means. Yet this vision comes with increase in risk. Each operation has the potential to spiral beyond control, turning a triumph into disaster in the blink of an eye. Dutch is intoxicated by possibility, but Arthur's warnings echo louder with each reckless move, emphasizing that even genius carried to extremes has a cost. New alliances emerge in unexpected forms. Elias Ward, the pragmatic former bounty hunter, continues to collaborate with Trevor, providing foresight and tactical expertise that balance Trevor's improvisational chaos. Their partnership, while temporary and opportunistic, becomes a powerful combination that enables the gang to undertake operations that would have been impossible without both men's involvement. Towns that once feared destruction now cautiously approach Trevor and his allies, offering temporary alliances or protection in exchange for services or intimidation of rival factions. Trevor, always calculating opportunity and amusement, navigates these relationships with manic delight, extracting both advantage and spectacle from every interaction. Despite the apparent successes, the consequences of these alliances and rivalries are ever present. Lawmen grow more organized, rival gangs adapt, and the frontier itself becomes a crucible of constant tension. Every decision carries the weight of potential catastrophe, and every alliance carries both opportunity and risk. Trevor's presence has fundamentally altered the social, operational, and psychological landscape of the frontier. The Linde gang, caught between admiration, fear, and rivalry, adapts to this new reality while contending with the moral and strategic costs of every action. The climax of this period comes when a high-stakes confrontation draws together multiple factions. The Linde gang, Trevor and Elias, rival gangs, and an unprecedented force of lawmen, all converging near the heart of the northern trade routes. Trevor, true to form, treats the conflict as a masterpiece of improvisation. He orchestrates chaos with unparalleled precision. Boulders tumble, fires ignite, wildlife intervenes in unpredictable ways, and every human actor is manipulated into positions that maximize both disruption and advantage. The resulting spectacle is a maelstrom of violence and strategy, leaving the frontier scarred, the participants humbled, and the Linde gang's position strengthened in ways both thrilling and terrifying. By nightfall, Trevor stands atop a ridge, surveying the devastation, a manic grin lighting his face, cigar smoke curling into the wind. Dutch sees a glimpse of unbounded power. Arthur sees the cost of chaos, and Micah seethes at the man who bested him at every turn. The frontier has been irrevocably reshaped. Alliances have been tested, rivalries inflamed, and the balance of power forever altered. Trevor's presence has made the unpredictable the norm, forcing every person, every faction, and every gang to adapt or perish. Every victory, every betrayal, every improvisation has strengthened his legend. The stage is set for the ultimate consequences of his actions, and the frontier now waits to see how the Linde gang and the world itself will respond to a force that cannot be tamed, predicted, or controlled. The frontier, once chaotic in its own right, is forever transformed by the arrival of Trevor Philips. His manic brilliance, audacity, and unrelenting chaos have left an indelible mark on towns, gangs, and law enforcement alike. The Linde gang, having adapted to his unpredictable methods, finds itself stronger in some ways, but more fractured in others. Dutch is exhilarated, convinced that Trevor's audacity has opened a new era of dominance for the gang, one where fear and spectacle are as valuable as gold. Arthur, ever the realist, reflects on the cost, the moral compromises, the lives endangered, and the thin line between survival and utter catastrophe that Trevor has forced them all to navigate. Micah, consumed by jealousy and anger, continues to simmer, his rivalry with Trevor having escalated to a level that threatens to erupt at any moment, adding an ever-present tension to every operation. Trevor himself stands apart, a force of nature unconcerned with morality, loyalty, or consequence beyond his own amusement and sense of mastery over the chaos he creates. He surveys the frontier with manic satisfaction, taking in the towns that whisper his name, the rival gangs that now hesitate at every move, and the lawmen who adapt too slowly to his improvisational genius. Every action he has taken, from the small-scale ambushes to the coordinated assaults that left entire valleys in disarray, has cemented a reputation that borders on legend. In every town, travelers tell tales of the man who moves like a hurricane, strikes like lightning, and laughs in the face of danger, a man whose very presence challenges the order of the Old West and reshapes it in his own image. The ripple effects of Trevor's actions extend far beyond immediate victories. Trade routes that were once secure are now fraught with unpredictability. Towns implement haphazard defenses, hire mercenaries, and rely on constant vigilance, while merchants and settlers adjust their routines to avoid attracting the attention of the chaotic force that has swept across the region. Rival gangs, once confident in their operations, now hesitate, coordinating their actions with unprecedented caution or abandoning territories altogether. Even the most seasoned lawmen, hardened by decades of frontier violence, are forced to reconsider tactics, forming alliances, deploying innovative strategies, and relying on local knowledge in ways that had been unnecessary before Trevor's arrival. The frontier itself has become a living chessboard where every move carries risk, every encounter is unpredictable, and the only constant is the presence of chaos. The Linde gang experiences both triumph and strain as a result of Trevor's influence. Dutch seizes opportunities for expansion, orchestrating campaigns that leverage Trevor's ingenuity to dominate supply lines, intimidate rival gangs, and secure footholds across multiple territories. Arthur, balancing admiration with concern, adapts strategies to contain the fallout of Trevor's unbridled improvisation, blending careful planning with the creative energy that only Trevor can provide. Micah, increasingly reckless, attempts to assert himself at every turn, provoking conflicts that threaten to undermine both operations and morale. The gang's cohesion is tested continuously, as every victory carries the risk of disaster, and every alliance is strained by the unpredictability that defines Trevor's methods. Trevor's legacy is not limited to his immediate actions. His presence changes the very culture of the frontier, inspiring both fear and grudging respect. Outlaws, inspired or terrified, adjust their behavior, adopting improvisational tactics and unpredictable strategies in an attempt to emulate or survive his example. Towns and lawmen alike adjust their routines, fortify positions, and rethink the rules of engagement in ways that will persist long after any single battle is over. Stories of his exploits spread across territories, creating legends that mingle reality with exaggeration, a combination that ensures that his influence will endure in the collective consciousness of the frontier for years to come. The personal impact on the Linde gang is profound. Dutch is enthralled by the possibilities of unrestrained chaos, seeing in Trevor a tool for achieving a level of dominance that was previously unimaginable. Arthur contemplates the ethical and practical implications of operating alongside such unbridled power, weighing survival against morality in a way that tests his very character. Micah, consumed by jealousy, continues to push boundaries in attempts to rival Trevor, creating internal tension that is at once dangerous and defining for the gang's dynamic. Trevor, indifferent to these internal struggles, continues to push the frontier itself, a whirlwind of unpredictability and ingenuity that ensures that every day brings new challenges, new spectacles, and new consequences. The frontier landscape, scarred by battles, ambushes, and improvised chaos, stands as a testament to Trevor's influence. Valleys are littered with the remnants of past confrontations. Forests bear the marks of explosive ingenuity, and rivers and cliffs have been transformed into tools of both strategy and spectacle. The towns, forever wary, have implemented a mixture of defensive ingenuity and superstition, wary of the man who has rewritten the rules of engagement. Rival gangs remain cautious, wary of both direct confrontation and clever improvisation, while lawmen adapt slowly, learning that conventional methods are often inadequate against a mind as chaotic and brilliant as Trevor's. The frontier itself bears witness to the culmination of a force that reshapes both geography and society in equal measure. As weeks turn into months, the ripple effects of Trevor's presence deepen. Rival gangs that had once dismissed the Linde gang now treat them with a mixture of fear and respect, knowing that Trevor's unpredictability can turn any engagement into disaster for the unprepared. Supply lines that had been secure for decades are now vulnerable to sudden ambushes, and entire towns implement rotating patrols, lookout systems, and secret warning signals in an effort to anticipate his next move. Every action Trevor takes is amplified by his reputation. A single appearance can destabilize an entire region, forcing rival factions to delay or abandon plans simply out of caution. Even law enforcement, once confident in their ability to maintain order, begins to adopt unconventional strategies, creating mobile task forces, relying on local informants, and studying the patterns of chaos Trevor leaves behind. Within the Linde gang, the balance between admiration and fear continues to define relationships. Dutch becomes increasingly reliant on Trevor, his schemes growing bolder, his ambition inflated by the successes that only Trevor can engineer. Arthur, still the voice of caution, recognizes that while these victories expand the gang's influence, they also carry a growing cost in both morale and morality. Every engagement leaves traces of chaos, wounded allies, displaced townsfolk, and the lingering threat of vengeance from rival factions. Micah, unable to match Trevor's brilliance, spirals further into recklessness, his envy poisoning opportunities for cohesion and making every mission a tense negotiation between loyalty and personal ambition. The gang's internal dynamics are now a microcosm of the frontier itself, unpredictable, volatile, and subject to the whims of the most uncontainable force among them. Trevor's personal legend grows alongside the tangible changes he imposes on the frontier. Stories of his exploits circulate in every town and campfire, blending reality with exaggeration in ways that amplify his reputation. A lone rider who encounters Trevor often returns with tales of a man who laughs in the face of danger, moves with impossible speed, and turns even the most carefully laid plans into chaos. Children whisper his name in awe, merchants hedge their operations around his whims, and even rival outlaws speak cautiously, recognizing that conventional methods are futile against someone who thrives on improvisation and unpredictability. His legacy becomes not only physical but psychological, reshaping how every actor in the region perceives risk, power, and strategy. The cumulative effect of Trevor's actions begins to force the Linde gang into new methods of operation. Dutch incorporates elements of improvisation into planning, recognizing that chaos, when wielded strategically, can be as effective as careful strategy. Arthur adjusts tactics to mitigate unintended consequences, blending careful observation with adaptive improvisation, creating a hybrid methodology that allows the gang to survive and thrive amid uncertainty. Micah, increasingly unmanageable, becomes both a liability and a wild card, his jealousy driving unpredictable behavior that Trevor manipulates to the gang's advantage, further cementing his dominance over both allies and enemies. The frontier itself is transformed into a theater of constant tension and innovation. Rivers that once served as simple boundaries are now used in elaborate diversions. Valleys and ridges are converted into strategic battlegrounds where a single misstep can mean disaster. Towns adjust their routines, employing both ingenuity and superstition to anticipate the arrival of the unpredictable man who reshapes the rules of engagement. Even nature itself becomes a tool, as wildlife reacts to the chaos Trevor instigates, influencing both enemy and ally movements in ways that seem orchestrated yet remain entirely improvised. The environment has become an extension of Trevor's strategy, turning the frontier into a dynamic living system that responds to his presence. Trevor's impact also begins to redefine the very concept of survival on the frontier. Previously, success depended on planning, skill, and experience. Now, adaptability, improvisation, and psychological acuity are equally critical. Outlaws, lawmen, and settlers alike learn to anticipate chaos, to read patterns in unpredictability, and to prepare for events that defy expectation. Trevor teaches through example, if not intent, that the rules of the Old West are mutable, that audacity and ingenuity can outweigh numbers and firepower, and that legend is forged not only through victory, but through the ability to survive and dominate amidst disorder. By mid-season, the Linde gang has reached a turning point. They occupy more territory, control critical trade routes, and have a reputation that rivals any established faction in the frontier. Yet with every success comes cost. Strained relationships, moral compromises, and the constant threat that Trevor's uncontainable energy may tip the balance from dominance to disaster. Dutch celebrates the victories, Arthur contemplates the personal toll, and Micah seethes with jealousy, ensuring that the internal dynamic remains tense, combustible, and utterly unpredictable. Trevor, meanwhile, revels in the chaos he has created, a force that cannot be restrained, a man whose legacy will be measured not only by conquest, but by the permanent transformation he has imposed on the frontier. As Trevor's presence solidifies across the frontier, the consequences of his unrestrained methods begin to manifest in dramatic and unpredictable ways. Rival gangs, once confident in their operations, now hesitate at every turn, unsure whether they face an adversary who will fight strategically or erupt into unpredictable chaos. Some factions attempt to exploit Trevor's maniacal tendencies, hoping that his impulsive decisions might create openings for their own advantage. They quickly learn that every gamble is met with a countermeasure they cannot anticipate. Trevor improvises with precision, manipulating terrain, psychology, and timing to ensure that any advantage his opponents hope to exploit becomes either a trap or an opportunity for greater destruction. News of these confrontations spreads quickly, further enhancing his reputation and making even experienced outlaws reconsider any direct engagement. The Linde gang, while benefiting strategically from Trevor's methods, experiences internal fractures that grow more pronounced. Dutch, intoxicated by the gang's expanding influence, becomes increasingly reliant on Trevor, giving him autonomy in operations that once required careful planning. Arthur, always the voice of caution, finds his role shifting. He is now a manager of chaos, tasked with mitigating the fallout from Trevor's unpredictability while leveraging its advantages. Every operation carries dual layers of tension, the external threat from rival factions and the internal threat from the volatile combination of Trevor and Micah. Micah, humiliated repeatedly by Trevor's brilliance, attempts increasingly audacious acts of sabotage, ranging from undermining logistics to provoking unnecessary confrontations. Trevor, perceptive and unflinching, turns each act against him, orchestrating scenarios in which Micah's reckless energy becomes a weapon in the gang's favor, or a spectacle that reinforces Trevor's dominance. The towns and settlements of the frontier bear the brunt of this transformation. Merchants, settlers, and lawmen adjust their routines to anticipate sudden chaos, developing rapid response strategies and improvised defenses. Trade routes that were once predictable are now fraught with uncertainty, with caravan leaders wary of potential ambushes orchestrated by Trevor's manic brilliance. Even the natural environment becomes a tool in his campaigns. Rivers, cliffs, and forests are manipulated to create diversions and obstacles, while wildlife, responding instinctively to the upheaval, influences the movement of both allies and adversaries in ways that seem almost orchestrated. The frontier itself has been remade into a living, reactive theater of conflict, in which every decision carries heightened consequence, and survival demands constant vigilance, ingenuity, and adaptability. Trevor's legacy extends beyond immediate tactical successes. Stories of his exploits become a currency of fear and respect, circulating through taverns, trading posts, and campfires. Travelers whisper of the man who strikes with sudden violence, who manipulates both human and environmental elements with uncanny precision, and who leaves no battlefield unscarred. The myth of Trevor Philips grows as rapidly as his influence, a combination of fact, exaggeration, and outright legend that ensures his presence will loom over the frontier long after any single operation has ended. Townsfolk adopt new strategies, not just for survival, but to avoid drawing his attention, altering the social and operational norms of the region in ways that persist beyond his immediate actions. Within the Linde gang, relationships have been irreversibly altered. Dutch is emboldened, his ambition expanded by Trevor's audacity and ability to execute seemingly impossible operations. Arthur, balancing admiration and caution, recognizes the cost of operating alongside such unbridled energy, contemplating the ethical compromises and human toll implicit in every victory. Micah, increasingly unhinged in his rivalry, contributes to an environment of constant tension, ensuring that the gang is never fully at ease, even in moments of triumph. Trevor, indifferent to internal politics except where they serve his amusement or strategic goals, continues to push the frontier itself, creating opportunities, manipulating rivals, and ensuring that chaos remains the defining element of every encounter. The culmination of this period comes during a series of coordinated operations against the remaining significant rival factions. Trevor orchestrates a complex web of ambushes, diversions, and environmental manipulation, while Elias Ward provides strategic foresight, and the Linde gang executes under the dual guidance of improvisation and planning. The resulting victories are both dramatic and devastating, leaving entire territories destabilized, rival leaders humiliated or captured, and supply lines disrupted. Every faction that had underestimated Trevor or the gang now recalibrates their strategies, acknowledging that survival in the frontier has become contingent on anticipating the unpredictable. Trevor's actions have permanently shifted the balance of power, ensuring that the frontier is no longer a landscape defined by predictability, but one dominated by innovation, audacity, and the ever-present possibility of chaos. The Linde gang emerges stronger but altered, their operations now inextricably linked with the chaos that Trevor brings. Dutch basks in the apparent limitless potential. Arthur remains vigilant against the moral and operational cost, and Micah seethes with unresolved rivalry, ensuring that the gang's internal dynamic continues to be volatile. Trevor, as always, remains untamed, moving across the frontier with manic delight, a living embodiment of unpredictability and brilliance. The legacy he leaves is not just a series of victories, but a permanent transformation of the frontier's culture, strategies, and perception of power. Survival now demands more than skill or courage. It demands the ability to navigate the unpredictable, to embrace chaos, and to recognize that in a world shaped by Trevor Philips, unpredictability is both weapon and law. The frontier, scarred and reshaped by Trevor Philips, stands as a testament to the consequences of unbridled chaos. Entire regions have been destabilized, rival factions shattered, and the social and operational fabric of the Old West irrevocably altered. Even after the dust settles, the echoes of his actions reverberate in every town, every trading post, and every canyon where the Linde gang and their allies have operated. Settlers adjust their routines, wary of the next unpredictable encounter. Outlaws adapt their strategies, blending improvisation with calculated planning in an attempt to survive a world where conventional rules no longer apply. Lawmen, humbled by repeated failures, re-examine every aspect of frontier enforcement, realizing that control and order are fleeting concepts when faced with someone who thrives in the chaos of unpredictability. Trevor's presence has changed the frontier in ways that will endure far beyond any single confrontation, leaving a landscape defined not just by survival, but by the constant tension between order and unrestrained mayhem. Within the Linde gang, the outcomes of Trevor's rampage are complex and layered. Dutch sees a world of limitless possibilities, emboldened by the victories and dominance Trevor's methods have enabled. He envisions expansion, consolidation, and the creation of a legacy built on fear, ingenuity, and spectacle. Arthur, contemplative and cautious, weighs the human cost of every action. The lives lost, the moral compromises made, and the delicate balance between genius and disaster that defines Trevor's influence. Micah, humiliated yet undeterred, continues to fume, his rivalry having escalated into a constant pressure that keeps the gang dynamic unstable. In this crucible of chaos, every member of the gang has been forced to adapt, compromise, and survive, their characters shaped indelibly by the man who cannot be predicted, controlled, or contained. Trevor himself remains a singular force. His manic laughter echoes across valleys, his ingenuity leaves enemies humiliated, and his audacity ensures that no victory is ever truly complete without spectacle. He embodies a living paradox, destructive yet brilliant, chaotic yet strategically effective, feared yet admired. Every action he takes leaves both a tangible and psychological mark on the frontier, altering behavior, shifting alliances, and challenging the perception of what is possible in a world built on rules, tradition, and order. The frontier's balance has shifted, not through careful planning alone, but through the pure, unrestrained force of a man whose very presence reshapes reality. Even in victory, the consequences of Trevor's legacy are inescapable. Towns, once secure, have become wary fortresses. Rival gangs either submit, scatter, or cautiously adapt their strategies to avoid confrontation. The Linde gang, though strengthened by Trevor's brilliance, is forever altered in its internal dynamics, with loyalty, rivalry, and ambition intertwined in a complex web that will influence every decision, every mission, and every relationship moving forward. The frontier itself has become a testament to his influence, unpredictable, dangerous, and alive with tension, a place where every encounter demands creativity, courage, and adaptability. Trevor's impact will linger for years, a permanent scar on the social and operational landscape of the Old West. As the sun sets over the rugged hills, casting long shadows across valleys and towns, Trevor lights a cigar and surveys the frontier. His grin is manic, satisfied, and almost serene, a man who has both conquered and transformed a world he never truly belonged to. Dutch watches, dreaming of further dominance. Arthur reflects quietly, contemplating the cost of chaos and the balance between brilliance and destruction. Micah, humiliated and seething, plots silently, ensuring that the rivalry, tension, and unpredictability will continue to shape the gang's future. Trevor's story in the Red Dead Redemption 2 universe concludes not with an ending, but with a legacy. A force of chaos that has rewritten the rules, reshaped the frontier, and ensured that the world will never be the same again. Trevor Philips is not just an outlaw in a new world, he is an embodiment of unpredictability, audacity, and genius. His influence is a permanent reminder that chaos can be as powerful as order, that improvisation can outweigh strategy, and that the most indelible legends are forged not by careful planning alone, but by the courage, or madness, to defy expectation entirely. The frontier has been changed, the Van der Linde gang transformed, and Trevor's legend forever etched into the fabric of the Old West. Before we wrap up, I've got to ask if you could witness Trevor's chaos firsthand in the Red Dead Redemption 2 universe, what would you do first? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I guarantee the answers will be as wild and unpredictable as Trevor himself. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey through chaos in the Old West, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next What If adventure across gaming worlds. Until next time, keep imagining the impossible, and remember, some legends are built on chaos,